I'm in Adobe Illustrator, a vector graphics program put out by Adobe. Same company puts out Photoshop. And this is not a lesson on Adobe Illustrator by any means. Rather, it's a lesson on tooltips. So I'm going to use Adobe Illustrator to show you what tooltips are, and then we'll go into Visual Studio and look at how to set them up and how to change them programmatically. So I suspect the name probably originated from having a toolbox of tools with icons identifying the different tools like we have over here on the left-hand side of Adobe Illustrator. And if I were to point at an icon, it shows me the name of that tool and the keyboard shortcut for it. So here's the line segment tool. Here's the puppet warp tool, the rectangle tool, and so forth. So those little pop-ups that tell you what the tool is, that is the tooltip. Now tooltips aren't limited to providing information about the icons or about these buttons. You might also find them down here on some text buttons. So down here on the bottom right, we have the document setup button, and it shows me it's going to give me some document setup options if I click on it. And the same with preferences. It's going to specify your preferences. Here's the enter artboard editing mode. So those are tooltips. Let's look at a C# project utilizing tooltips. Now I'm in a C# project that I called Tooltip Demo, and I have some buttons here. SMCC, if I point to it, says South Mountain Community College. ASU says Arizona State University, and NAU says Northern Arizona University. I set these up simply using the properties of Visual Studio. Now down here I have some labels that are labeled A, B, and C. And right now each label shows a tooltip of an animal starting with that letter. So we have alligator, badger, cheetah, donkey, elephant. And I want to show you how to change these programmatically. So I have 3 radio buttons here. I can set the tooltips to animals, which is what they're set at now, but I can change these to vegetables. And now the A says asparagus, B is broccoli, cauliflower, daikon, eggplant. I also have one for nations. Austria, Brazil, Canada, Denmark, and Ethiopia. So that's the project. I'm going to show you how to set this up. So here we are in Visual Studio. Here's the project you just saw. And I'm going to walk through my interface. I have 3 buttons. I didn't bother to name these. There's button 1, button 2, button 3. And then I have 5 labels named LBLA, LBLB, LBLC, LBLD, and LBLE. And then finally we have 3 radio buttons, RB Animals, RB Veggies, and RB Nations. To set up tooltips for these 3 buttons up at the top, what I'm going to do is go to my toolbox and find the tooltip tool and just drag it to the screen anywhere. It's going to put it down here on the system tray. By default, it's named Tooltip 1. I'm going to leave it as that. But I'm going to select my SMCC button, and I'm going to set the tooltip for this in the properties. So when I added the Tooltip 1, it now has altered the properties for button 1 so that we now get Tooltip on Tooltip 1. And I'm simply going to type in South Mountain Community College. I'm going to click on the ASU button. Same thing. Tooltip on Tooltip 1 is now a property for that button. And here I'm going to say Arizona State University. And then finally the NAU. And this is Northern Arizona University. So having done that, I'm just going to test this so you can see that those now work. And I point to SMCC, I get South Mountain Community College, Arizona State University, and Northern Arizona University. So those were taken care of in the properties. But for my 5 labels, I'd like to set those up programmatically so that the tooltips change based on which radio button is selected here. Now I've already gone ahead and programmed that, so I'm going to take you into the code and walk you through what I did. Let me get the properties panel out of the way. I started inside the Form 1 public class. I created a label array called myLabels. And I know I have 5 labels, so I set it to new, type label, an array of 5. That's going to give me indexes 0 through 4. Now those, I can't populate those here like we would maybe just a string label of text, because these labels don't exist at this point until the form is created. And that form is created here with the public form constructor. After it initializes the components, I can then populate the 5 array indices of my labels with my 5 literal labels of LBLA, LBLB, LBLC, and so forth. Then I also have a rbAnimals.checkedTrue so that it would check that radio button of the 3. And I want to do that here rather than do that in properties, because I have some code that's going to run when the radio button is checked. I'm going to run back to my design for a minute. I have these 3 radio buttons, and in the properties, I went to the events. I set up an event handler called setToolType for the checked changed event of those 3 radio buttons. So let's take a look at that code. So here's my setToolType. It takes object sender event args e. And then I created a radio button instance called RB. I cast sender as a radio button and assigned it to RB. Basically what I'm doing here is assuring Visual Studio that sender will always be a radio button, or we'll treat it as a radio button. I only want this code to execute if that radio button has become checked, because check changed occurs both when we check and uncheck radio buttons. So if rb.checked, that's going to be a true or false value. So if that's true, then I've got an if structure here. And inside that if structure, I'm going to run a switch. And I'm running a switch simply on the name of RB. So if the radio button is that RB veggies, then RB takes on the sender of RB veggies. So this RB really is whatever object sender is. So I'm going to look at the name of the object that triggered setToolTip. If it's rbAnimals, I'm going to stretch out my code here a little bit. If it's rbAnimals, I have a string array called animals, and I set my 5 values: alligator, badger, cheetah, donkey, elephant. And then I call a method called updateLabelTooltips, and I'm going to pass it in my array of animals. Let's take a look at what this method is and what it does. So here is that method. It has a parameter of a string array called, and I named that string array parameter myTips. So it's going to pass in animals into myTips, and then I simply did a little for loop going from 0, my initial value, to 5. So it's going to go through i's less than 5, incrementing each time through. So it's going to take it from 0 to 4. And all I'm doing in the for loop is using the tooltip1, the tooltip object. I'm calling a method called setToolTip, and I'm telling it which object I want to set the tooltip for and what the text should be. This text would be a string value here. So here's my code. Tooltip1 was our tooltip object. I'm calling setToolTip, and I'm going to pass it myLabel sub I. The first time that will be myLabel A. Why is it myLabel A? Because that's what we set myLabel 0 to when we loaded the form. We set myLabel index 1 to LBLB, myLabel sub 2 to LBLC, and so forth. So what it's going to do the first time through the loop, myLabel sub 0 is going to be LBLA, and myTips sub 0 is going to be the first element passed to the array, passed from the array, which will be alligator. And it's going to set LBLA as alligator. Next time through the loop, it's going to set LBLB as badger. Next time through the loop, setting LBLC as cheetah. When I is a 3, we're going to set LBLD to the value of donkey. And then finally, LBLE, which would be instance 4, is going to set the value of the tooltip of that label to the value of elephant. Then all I do is I simply do the same thing with the other 2 radio buttons. Passing it 5 vegetable names, passing it 5 nation names, and calling update label tooltips on those particular arrays. That's what allows the application, when I run it, to take on different values based on what radio button I have selected. So now we have Austria, Brazil, Canada, and so forth. If we go to veggies, we now have asparagus, broccoli, cauliflower, and so forth. And back to the animals. Alligator, badger, etc. That's how you can programmatically change the value of tooltips for objects using this generic statement here of whatever the tooltip is, the .cell tooltip method, and the object, comma, the text.